Hello, and welcome to another midweek devotion with Pastor Andrew. That's me. Um, been sick for a week. It's gorgeous outside. Weather report. We continue this thought process of what is truth, but then also, why are there these different versions of stories in the Bible? Two creation stories, the Gospels, the Synoptic Gospels, meaning Matthew, Mark, and Luke. The same story of Christ, right? The same telling of the gospel story, but why are they different? So, we had a bit of discussing Luke last week. Different stories. What if everyone told the same story? Thinking about that, that kind of homework that was in there. If you can picture a field, and ask someone to describe it, would everyone describe it the same way? Separate from one another. Here's the thing that maybe this is a bad metaphor, but our book, like, okay, well, that's green. Well, then someone's like, no, it's military green, or no, that looks blue to me, or whatever, and just, it's those differences, but it's the same thing. Maybe that's a bad metaphor, but, well, who knows? And I think where we're at is, we were asked to talk about, as I'm looking here, the Transfiguration. Imagine you were there. Would you tell someone, even though Jesus said, don't tell anybody what you saw? Maybe you wouldn't, but you know what? I think more of us, yeah, we would. We'd be like, yeah, okay, I know he said not to do this, but I just saw something amazing, right? And would those stories be the same? So we were supposed to think about that. And now we move to this question, what were they thinking? The Gospel of Matthew also tells of Jesus' transfiguration, Matthew 17, 1 through 13. And it details things a bit differently. Of course, Jesus' clothes still become dazzling white. He's still in the company of Moses and Elijah. And the voice of God still speaks to the apostles. Yet in this account, in Matthew, the reader uncovers one critical piece of information. Jesus told the three not to tell anyone of what they witnessed. No longer, as in Luke, does the reader wonder about why the apostles didn't say anything, and no longer does the reader doubt their faithfulness. So see, even there, in Luke, right, maybe he doesn't necessarily say that, but no one shares stuff, see? But now Matthew's like, oh, well, he said, don't say anything. So see, and I can't keep it straight. But that really doesn't mean much. Christ then reveals that he will die at the hands of the people, and he orders them not to tell anyone. That leaves the reader wondering why the disciples didn't disobey Jesus, or why they didn't question Jesus' directive to keep the story secret. Because really, they didn't. Those three that went up there with him, they didn't say anything. It must have been difficult for the disciples to know that Jesus was about to be sentenced to death and not be able to plan with other followers a way to stop it. It's interesting, because if I remember correctly, again, see, all these different versions of the story, and they kind of get woven together. They didn't like that. They didn't like that Jesus was talking about his death. It seems every time I can think, where Jesus is like, yeah, so I'm going to die, and this is what's going to happen. I mean, he doesn't go into details that I'll be crucified and all that. They say, don't talk like that. And that's so many words. Yeah, don't say that. Why do you keep saying that? We don't like that you're saying that. Stop it. They're like, stop it. Even one of those conversations is that famous one where Jesus says, get behind me, Satan. Because, Simon Peter's like, don't do it. I don't like it. And he's like, you're standing in the way. Get behind me, Satan. That temptation to not do it. Okay. For most, the impulse wouldn't be to sit idly by and allow it to happen. It would be to try and stand up for the beloved teacher, which they did. I don't know why it says that. It was no different for the apostles. At some point, however, each of these apostles had to make a conscious decision to obey Jesus, even though they didn't understand why. So, these two different stories here, we're talking still about that transfiguration, that difference there. And then, really, I see a question of humanness here, which I think is something we might find difficult in associating, even with Christ, but then also with the apostles sometimes. At least when I was growing up, if you said the word apostles, then it was like that was a step up on this, in a sense, Christian ladder of holiness. But it's not like that. It's or you hear disciples, and you're like, oh, well, that's the 12. No, that's all of us. Disciples are followers and people that, are on this journey as yet by faith. So all these words can be intermingled. People have trouble saying, oh, well, Andrew or well, that pastor, well, he's also an apostle. Oh, I don't know. Do we know what that means, right? So that's a little different, but it's just thinking of those things. It's that humanness here. How do we deal with this now? We're following this guy. He's saying these things. We're not really sure when this is going to happen. I think they should probably have an idea, but maybe that's because, we're on the other side of the resurrection. Hey, this is going to be our last meal, and someone's going to betray me, and things are set in motion here. Did that click for them? I don't know. But I think that humanness here, as we get into these different stories, how do we read these? How do we hear them separately, but then together? For me here, that example is they kind of all mesh together. And sometimes I can't quite remember which one of the stories, the Gospels, does Jesus say, don't say anything? Where is it left out? And where is it? Yeah. So there you go. So some things to think about this week. Discuss a time when a friend wanted to be helped but didn't want to ask. Ugh. Did you help this friend? How do you think the disciples felt? Right? Here, a little bit of a Bible study. Compare the account of the Transfiguration in Luke to Matthew. Are there similarities, and what are the differences? So I'll just bring that back. So the Transfiguration is Luke 9, 28 through 36, and Matthew is 17, 1 through 13. Maybe look at those. That's a great exercise as we engage our Bible. It's a Bible study. This is Luke's account, this is Matthew's account. What's the same and what's different? And then, how do you feel about that? How does that speak to you? So a couple quotes here, point, counterpoint. Jesus was all right, but his disciples were thick and ordinary. It's them twisting it that ruins it for me. Guess who said that? John Lennon. Another quote, the human qualities of the raw materials show through. Naivete, error, contradiction even, as in the cursing psalms. Wickedness are not removed. The total result is not the word of God in the sense that every passage in itself gives impeccable science or history. It carries the word of God. Whoa. You might want to back it up and listen to that again. C.S. Lewis. Do the variations in the gospel accounts diminish the validity of these accounts? See, that's a really deep question, isn't it? But I don't know that it's one that we think about too much or address too much. Mark says this, and Luke says this, but boy, Luke's account is a lot more detailed. And does that mean that Luke was just a better writer? Or is Mark's like, well, I hit the highlights. There's all these things, this biblical history, um, that we can dive into if we want. It's a bit of a Bible study. But again, it comes back to that question: what does this mean, and how does it matter in your faith? To be honest, for me, um, the disciples and the writers of the Gospels and all the books of the Bible, I mean, they're written by people, right? And people tell different stories. And even sometimes the same person will tell the same story, and suddenly there's additions, or they tell them over years, and then there's subtractions. You're like, oh wait, I thought this happened. Oh no, I was mistaken. That didn't really happen. What happened actually was this. But we like that kind of thing, don't we? Because it grabs our attention, and there's retention of it, right? Anyway, quite a few tangents. Again, what are these different versions, and what do they mean to me, to you? So next week we talk a little bit more about that. Why does the Word of God vary? Interesting. Oh boy, yeah. See, we dive into some serious stuff here, and it really kind of starts to turn into a Bible study. Let's close in prayer. Good and gracious God, continue to be with us as we seek to dive into what these things mean to us on the surface, but then also a bit deeper. As I looked ahead to the pages, we can get really bogged down in some serious study. And I guess even that, does that even, it helps us perhaps to understand you and the Word of God given to us through the Bible, but also help us to keep you at the center and the true gospel and the Word and how it affects us so that we may share it and love one another. Amen. I hope all that made sense. I'm kind of running on empty. So until next week.